The first topic today is, of course, trans man murdered by Indonesian police. Rodrigo Ventosilla, him, was a 32-year-old Peruvian trans man who was traveling to Bali, Indonesia to celebrate his honeymoon with his husband, Sebastian Marilano, she pronouns. Indonesian police detained Rodrigo in Denpasar airport on the 6th of August. They would also later arrest Sebastian when he arrived on a later flight and began asking about his husband. The pair were taken into custody by Indonesia's Directorate of Drug Investigation, supposedly on suspicion that Rodrigo was traveling with cannabis-infused brownies. However, no formal charges were drawn against either Rodrigo or Sebastian, at least according to the trans right group Diversidades Transmasculinas, or DTM. Rodrigo reached out to his mum, Anna, telling her that the police wanted $100,000 for their release, reassuring her that he tried to negotiate it down to $13,000. Hours later, the amount had increased to $200,000. To quote Anna's mum, she told the Crimson Harvard, quote, "It was an extortion," end quote. Bali police refused to allow lawyers hired by the family or friends who landed in Bali to see either Rodrigo or Sebastian in person, leading to growing fears that they were being physically abused by police. Now, Indonesian police later moved Rodrigo to hospital on the 9th of August before he sadly passed away on the 11th of August. The Indonesian embassy in Peru stated that Rodrigo had died from, quote, "failure of bodily functions," end quote, as a result of consuming both prescription medications and marijuana whilst in police custody. Sebastian has since been released and has returned to Peru. During a press conference on the 29th of August, the family stated that Indonesian officials refused to perform an autopsy due to there being evidence of torture. The Indonesian embassy in Peru maintains that the family were the ones who refused. Mr. Ventosilla's body was set to be reparated on the 29th of August, but arrived on the 2nd of September. An autopsy was then performed on the 3rd of September, according to the family, though the results have not yet been released. And I have checked this since the last time this show was scheduled to go out. There's still been no news of that. At the start of September, it was announced that Peru's public ministry launched an investigation into the claims that 2 police officers had tortured Rodrigo, as well as the failure of the Peruvian consul in Jakarta to intervene and protect him. The investigation will also look into allegations that Sebastian was likewise tortured, reminder that Sebastian has since returned, meaning he is able to speak for himself. Bali police, of course, deny the accusations of torture. Luzmo Henriquez, a representative of the family, told the press that they believe Rodrigo, quote, "was detained because of his gender identity. His identity document did not match his appearance. That made him a suspect for the Indonesian police. He was extorted, tortured, and has died," end quote. Rodrigo's family and friends continue to fight for justice in hope of clearing his name. So there's a few things we want to unpack here, as we always do. This one, we're mostly focusing on the case, as we'll be talking about some stuff in general with the next story as well. The first thing I want to point out is the way that the upping of costs, that to me does scream extortion, as it does seem to have screamed the same with Rodrigo's mother. There was no reason for that amount to change as he was negotiating with the police, so it does just seem that the police was trying to get as much money as possible as they could from this case, and they felt like they could. I wonder if Rodrigo, being a Harvard student, had anything to do with that, because of course Harvard is internationally well known, so they possibly thought that Rodrigo comes from a very rich background, so possibly they can extort more than usual. Then we have the way that they blocked any physical contact, which brings into question why they would do that. And it kind of lends credence to the idea that both Rodrigo and Sebastian were being physically tortured. You know, um, it just doesn't make any sense for this to have happened otherwise. It just seems to have been a way to block any sort of accountability at the time, similar to the refusal to perform an autopsy. You know, they tried to pin it on the family, but the family has been adamant that they want an autopsy performed as soon as possible. Of course, the body, the autopsy has been performed 20 days after death, so I don't know how much information the mortician is going to be able to get from the body. There's always the possibility that they're not going to be able to ascertain much at this point. Hopefully they'll be able to. Hopefully the body was properly cared for and they will be able to actually, I'm trying to think of the word here, get some sort of idea of what happened, get closure for the family, and hopefully justice as a result. But we don't know if that's going to be the case. The fact that the Bali police were resistant to having autopsy performed and seemed to keep the body beyond the agreed date to actually have it sent back, that again raises red flags. Just like the way that Rodrigo apparently consumed mist marijuana and prescription meds, which ultimately supposedly led to his death. That makes zero sense whatsoever. If you believe someone has drugs, you check everything. Indonesia in particular is known for having rather brutal drug laws. So it just doesn't make any sense. Why would they miss, marijuana that someone's carrying if they suspect them of carrying? They wouldn't. This leads me into two sort of theories here, because there is the one that Rodrigo was force-fed the marijuana and prescription meds as an attempt to hide the physical torture that was done to him. This was forwarded by DTM, the organization we mentioned earlier. Another possibility is that he consumed his meds as an attempt at suicide, possibly to escape the torture that he was experiencing. I mean, just considering his state, he was under arrest. Why, even if he had, by some miraculous means, managed to hide the marijuana, why would he consume it whilst under observation? What sense would that make? Also, if he was carrying marijuana and if they did react with his prescription medications in this manner, surely he'd have experience of this and knows that. That's another thing that kind of gets me here. This idea that marijuana on its own is not a dangerous medication. It's not dangerous at all, okay? The prescription meds are probably more what killed him here, if it wasn't just the physical torture. But there's a possibility of the two mixing together, and that causing organ failure. I don't know if there are any medications that, when mixed with marijuana, do cause that, but that is a possibility. But if that were the case, you'd expect him to know. If they're his prescription medications and he's a regular marijuana user, you'd expect him to know. Why didn't this happen before? Why did it only happen magically whilst he was under custody? It just doesn't add up. We also have to consider Indonesia's growing queerphobia. Whilst Bali was kind of considered a queer-friendly hotspot in Indonesia, it's Austin, isn't it, in Texas?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like an Austin in Texas. It's kind of this queer fort. This, of course, challenges that, but there has been growing queerphobia in Indonesia with more recent political parties, so it makes one wonder if the growing situation there has kind of exacerbated things. And, the family is pretty certain that Rodrigo was singled out and profiled for being trans and Peruvian. Because it is important to note the fact that he is, of course, Peruvian as well. He wasn't a white trans person, and that does factor in. So as of the time of having the show, the autopsy has not yet been published, and that's got me wondering as to what's going on. Um, there's the possibility that they don't want to publish the results yet because it might hinder the investigation that the Peruvian government is doing currently. Um, there's also concerns about, will the Peruvian government ultimately publish them? Because I don't know the sort of relation that the Peruvian government has with Indonesia. Are they particularly big trade partners, etc.? Because if it comes out that, Indonesia isn't safe for LGBT plus people, it becomes an international incident. If an LGBT plus Peruvian person was murdered in Indonesian custody, that is an international issue, and it becomes a scene. And, there's part of me that worries that the government, if the results come out against Indonesia, won't necessarily make those results public. There is always that concern, but sadly, we just don't know. I have been checking daily to see if the autopsy results have been released. I don't know how soon they typically come out after an autopsy, but as of the time recording this on the 18th of September, they have not come out. I don't know if you have anything that you really wanted to add to any of this.
Not really. I think you covered everything.
Yeah. Again, this is more the facts of the case, and then we'll move on to a more general discussion in the next section. It's worth noting that Rodrigo was a founding member of the previously mentioned DTM, which describes itself as, quote, a support organization for the community of trans people who are assigned female at birth and who have a gender identity other than female, end quote. So, specifically advocating for trans men and trans masc individuals or non-binary AFAB people, that was a core part of Rodrigo's identity, and that is something that needs noting. Again, Rodrigo's family is fighting for justice. They want to know what happened. They want evidence to come out. They want to exonerate their son because they feel that the way the Indonesian government has been painting Rodrigo has really tarnished his name and everything that he's done, and they want that cleared. So hopefully they get that. Hopefully over the coming weeks, the autopsy results come back, sheds more light on things, and they can get that justice, that peace of mind, as much as is possible in a case like this. Sadly, there's nothing that can bring Rodrigo back, but hopefully they can get some form of closure of this.